other biblical characters as well. This is Josephus, probably the most important historian of the first century. Gaius Antonius Truncellus. This is from the 1st and 2nd century, early 2nd century. Another Roman historian, very important, that recorded references to Christ. Recorded the riots which broke between the Jews and Romans in the year 8049 during the investigation of Christ's claim. So we have another historian, non-Christian historian that mentions Christ. We have Thallus in the 1st century, historians that reference darkness and earthquake that occurred during Christ's crucifixion, referenced by Julius Africanus. Okay? Do you remember the darkness that occurred during the daytime? It'd be strange if all of a sudden everything was black right now, right? If it was completely dark. It would be so strange. All over people would be recording this. And apparently, that's what happened. Remember when Jesus was on the cross? Everything went black. And that's what happened. And Julius Africanus referenced this, and Thallus referenced Julius Africanus' account of this. Pliny the Younger, another very prominent Roman author that mentions the spread of early Christianity to pagan temples and includes early Christian practices. Okay, this is 1st century. Emperor Trajan, an emperor now, gave some of the first Roman views about early Christianity and corrective actions towards Christians. Okay, so Christianity is not a myth. The resurrection is not a myth. Emperor Hadrian, in the 2nd century, he had early judgments towards Christians. There's descriptions as well. So all these, even enemies of Christianity are mentioning Christianity. They are giving evidence to what we believe. Even the leading critics attest to the history of Jesus' death. Okay? Jesus' death is one of the most well-attested events of ancient history. Here's a guy by the name of John Dominic Crossan. You might have seen him on TV. He's always on like the Discovery Channel or PBS. He's all those documentaries that kind of make Christianity look like a myth. Okay? He's always on. He's one of our leading critics. He's part of the Jesus Seminar. John Dominic Crossan says this: that he was crucified is as sure as anything historical can ever be. Even our leading opponents like him are admitting to Jesus' crucifixion. Because there's just overwhelming evidence. Some evidence from history. There's 3 facts that must be reasonably explained by our critics. Okay, first of all, the empty tomb. Everyone, including the opponents of Christianity, Romans and Jews, all agree that the tomb was empty. The appearances of Christ. Christ appeared to more than 500 people. The permanently transformed lives of the apostles. You look at the lives of the apostles before Christ died and was resurrected, and then you look at their lives afterwards. They're willing to die, grisly deaths, torturous deaths. I've got to explain this. I remember I was watching a debate between William Lane Craig, he's a very famous apologist, and a very famous atheist. And William Lane Craig said this: okay, if you want to disprove Christianity, these 3 things disprove. I'm waiting for your argument. It was a 2-hour debate. Not one shred of evidence to disprove this came from William Lane Craig's opponent. Not one shred of evidence. He kept on saying, well, I'm waiting for it. Well, you're not giving me anything. And then he was able to prove the empty tomb, the appearance of Christ, the permanent transformed lives of the apostles. This is what William Lane was able to prove. Okay, we're going to go through some of that as well. All right, supernatural resurrection of Jesus Christ, collateral circumstance. Okay, in Matthew 27, verses 62 to 66. Okay, it says, next day the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. Sir, they said, we remember that while he was still alive, that the Caesar said, after 3 days I will rise again. So give the word for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first. And then Pilate answers, take a guard. Go make the tomb as secure as you know. So they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on a stone and posting a guard. Okay, now, in English, okay, many of you guys, I understand, are studying Greek. Okay? In English, it sounds like there's only one guard standing there. Okay, take a guard. But that's not the case. Pilate gave guard in Does anyone know what guard in Koine Greek is? Custodia. Okay, custodia. Custodia right here. It's a Roman security guard. Do you know how many guards was contained in a custodia? There were 16 guards, and they had approximately 5 weapons each. Okay, so there wasn't one guard, there were 16 guards. Okay, they probably went on rotation, maybe 4 guards at a time. So maybe 4 guards, 6 hours per day kind of thing, guarding the tomb of Jesus. So, why would it be very difficult for these weak disciples to steal Jesus' body, as they said? Okay, well, first of all, some people said, well, they were sleeping on duty. The guards were sleeping on duty. But is that plausible? No. The reason is this. What would happen to you if you were a guard and you slept while you are on duty? Do you know what happened to you? The death penalty. Yeah, so there's a lot of incentive not to. Okay? And imagine 4 of them all sleeping. That'd be almost virtually impossible. If you leave your post without authorization, let's say you left the post and you left, okay? Guess what the penalty would be for that? Death as well. So there's a lot of deterrence for the guards to leave. And then on top of that, there was a Roman seal that was placed over the tombstone. Okay, this is what we call a Pilate seal, a stamp, the personal stamp of Pilate himself, and this is a symbol of Roman power and authority. So they placed the seal over the tomb, if you recall. Now, if this were broken, guess what? If you were to break that seal, it would be the death penalty once again. Okay, so a lot of deterrence. There's no real reason for the disciples to go and steal the body if Jesus did not rise from the dead. So some theories advanced by the critics, the disciples removed the body while the guards were sleeping. Okay, this is kind of strange, silly. No one can testify about events that happened while they slept. Okay, so if they're sleeping, how do they even know it was the disciples? Secondly, the guards slept despite this death penalty. I told you about the death penalty. There was incentive not for them to sleep. The rolling stone failed to wake up the guard. Yeah, we have a 2-ton, 1.5 to 2-ton stone that covers the tomb. And it's stone against stone. The sounds would probably wake up the guards if they were sleeping. So this is how ridiculous it is. And the motive, they're like, what motive do they have for stealing Jesus' body? They have no real motive. If anything, if Jesus Christ died and didn't resurrect, they would try to run away far as possible. They don't want to be the next person to be crucified. So there's no motive for them to want to steal the body. The authorities moved the body for safekeeping. This is very silly as well. This is another theory that's been advanced. Okay? I'm going to show you how comical this is through a comment. Okay? Here are Jesus' disciples. Jesus is risen. The tomb is empty. Wow! And then here are the Jews and the Romans. Okay? Hey, shut those guys up. Okay, those Christians are saying, hey, Jesus resurrected. Yeah, shut them up. Just show them the body. Yes, just show them the body. Do you have the body? No, we don't have the body. Does anyone have the body? Okay. All you have to do is show them the body, and guess what? You can't say Jesus has resurrected. It'd be silly. Jesus' tomb was empty. Okay? The Jerusalem factor. So why not get the body, drag it through the streets, and shut down the Christian movement? They could have done that right away. But the Christian movement grew despite persecution. It would have been impossible for Christianity to begin in Jerusalem if the body was still in the grave. Okay? If you want to start a false movement, if you want to start a cult, okay, don't start it in the city where this thing happened. Okay? If the Jews the disciples, let's pretend Jesus didn't rise from the dead. It would be silly for them to start it in Jerusalem because that's where the events occurred. They should go far away, maybe all the way to China, and say, guess what? Our leader resurrected from the dead. They can't prove it, right? They can't prove it either way. And that's kind of like with Joseph Smith. You guys know Joseph Smith, the guy who started Mormonism? Okay. Did you know that where he first came to propagate Mormonism? In New York State. But guess where Mormonism grew? In Utah. Okay. Almost more than halfway across the country. The reason is no one in New York, they all knew Joseph Smith. They didn't want to believe him. But then you go somewhere far away that nobody knows Joseph Smith or the events that occurred. They could have checked upon the events in New York, right? But in Utah, you can't check. Okay, you see what's going on? So it would be silly for Christianity to start in Jerusalem. You got to remember, the first several years, Christianity was spread in Jerusalem. Jesus' tomb was empty. Testimony of women's considered under the Bible. Okay? Today, we all know that women's testimony is reliable. But back in 2,000 years ago, where Jesus lived, around that area, the testimony of women were considered invalid. They thought that women were stupid, unreliable, they lied all the time, etc. We know that today, in the 21st century, that's not true. Women's testimony is very reliable as well. Okay? In fact, sometimes women can be smarter than men. Okay? I kind of know because I teach at the world's largest women's university in the world. And I know my students are very smart and intelligent. So, this is actually good evidence. Testimony of women was not highly regarded. And a lot of the scholars acknowledge this because who did Jesus first appear to? Jesus first appeared to men or women? Women, right? So, that if you were going to start a false religion, that would be silly to write that down. To say, oh, Jesus appeared first to. Our first eyewitnesses were women. Yeah. So our critics kind of see this as a good point. So odd invention for the writers of the New Testament to make women the first witnesses. Okay, here's another theory by our critics. Okay, Christ rose spiritually, but not his body. Okay, kind of like airy-fairy. We don't need to believe that Christ rose physically. We just believe that he rose in our hearts or what have you. Okay, and this is a belief proposed by kind of like the New Age-ish kind of Christians. Okay, but this is silly. Why? Because even enemies did not dispute the empty tomb. Even their enemies knew that there was an empty tomb. So they believe that these critics they believe that Jesus was still in his tomb, but he rose spiritually. Okay? What can you spread? What kind of message is that? Jesus died, destroy this temple. Remember, Jesus said, destroy this temple and I will raise it up in 3 days. Remember that? Did Jesus lie about that? Jesus said, handle me and see for yourself. A spirit has not flesh and bones as you see that I have. After Jesus Christ rose again from the dead, you could touch him, you could feel him, you could smell his breath. Right? A spirit does not have those kind of things, those properties. The theory, Jesus didn't rise, it was a hallucination. Okay. How many people did Jesus appear to? Over 500 people. Do you guys know what a hallucination is? A hallucination is kind of like you're dreaming while you're still awake. You see things, okay? Okay, but only one person sees it. To have 500 people at the same time see the same image? Impossible. For 40 days? Impossible. Okay, this is how ridiculous it is. Okay? But there's a lot of scholars, quote-unquote scholars, that actually believe that this is true. They saw hallucination. Jesus appeared to the disciples. Jesus' disciples sincerely believed he rose and appeared to them. This is what the disciples sincerely believed. Established by primary evidence, Peter, Paul, and John wrote what they personally witnessed. Okay? We see that in the Bible. Established by Paul, who wrote about the appearances to the disciples in 1 Corinthians 15, we just read about them. And established by the written tradition, including the Gospels and the work of the apostolic and early church fathers, Origen, Polycarp, and Tertullian. Okay? Some of these people were disciples of the disciples of the apostles. So it's like maybe your father saw Jesus Christ rise from the dead and would tell you. Okay? Or maybe your grandfather would tell you. So we have many, many written traditions. Okay? They're not from the Bible. They're a little bit later on. But we have so many. Okay? I'll just give you a few of these. Okay? Now, written traditions, are there any writings that follow Gospels and the writings of Peter, John, and Paul? Yes, there are, okay? And these also help confirm the facts, okay? Look how many we have, okay? This is a handful, okay? Some of these are from the 1st century, like the Didache, and a few of these others are from the 1st century. Some of them actually maybe even knew Jesus. Ignatius is rumored to have been the child that, I think it was Ignatius that was rumored to be the child that Jesus picked up. And Polycarp was a disciple of John. Okay, so these are people who knew of people that saw Jesus as well. Okay, here's another popular theory that's been refuted, the swoon theory. The critics, do you guys know what the swoon theory is? Okay, Jesus didn't really actually die. He swooned. Okay, and then when he was in the room, when he was in the tomb, he woke up somehow. He took a Red Bull or something and he woke up. Okay, it's kind of silly, but this is what they believe. Okay, the context is this. Okay, you've got to remember, before Jesus Christ died, he sweat great drops of blood. Remember in the Garden of Gethsemane? Okay, he endured a sleepless night. He was beaten with fists. A crown of thorns was beaten into his head. He was scourged with the Roman flagellum. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Roman flagellum, what this entailed. Okay, this could have easily killed Jesus alone. Okay, for scourging, the man was stripped of his clothes and his hands were tied to a post like this. And you see here is what we call the whip or the flagellum. Okay, and they tied metal balls to it, and they had small bones, and these are leather thongs. I had a picture of one, but I didn't. Well, here it is. Here's a picture of one. This is what it looked like. Okay, very painful. Okay, I'll tell you why. The severity of scourging depended on the disposition of the soldiers and was intended to weaken the victim to a state just short of collapse or death. After the scourging, the soldiers often taunted their victim. Okay, they tried to weaken them as much as possible, just short of death. Okay, do you guys know why it's called the 39 lashes? The Jews call it the 39 lashes. Why do they call it 39 lashes? Because it was believed that at 40 lashes, you die. So they want to hold one before so that you can maximize the pain and the suffering that you go through. Okay? So this is the medical aspect of scourging. It says this: as the Roman soldiers repeatedly struck the victim's back with full force, the iron balls would cause deep contusions, and the leather thongs and sheep bones would cut into the skin and subcutaneous tissues. Then, as the flogging continued, the lacerations would tear into the underlying skeletal muscles and produce quivering ribbons of bleeding flesh. Pain and blood loss generally set the stage for circulatory shock. The extent of blood loss may well have determined how long the victim would survive on the cross. Okay? And you see the directions of the wound like this, and they're in stripes. Okay? Kind of a reminder of what passage? The stripes? By his stripes, yeah, they're healed. Yeah. Okay, John 19:17 says this: and he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the Skull, which is called in Aramaic Golgotha. Okay, so we see here, this is what we call patibulum, and then it weighed approximately 75 to 125 pounds. Patibulum. And this is a cross. This is a tau cross. We don't know exactly what the cross looked like, but it was probably looked like this or like this. And then over here, we see here the inscription. Okay, the inscription was in 3 languages. Do you know what languages they were? The inscription of Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. What were the 3 languages? Greek. Okay. Greek, Latin, and not Hebrew, it's actually Aramaic, okay? It's the language that's spoken. It was Hebrew form of Aramaic, okay? So we have here the Aramaic Hebrew right here, okay? And then we have the Latin, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeum, and then the Koine Greek, Jesus Nazareth Reis, or Basileus ton judaion. Okay? In the languages of the Roman Empire that was used in Rome, there was a declaration. Okay? But this was declaring, even though they were trying to make fun of Jesus, it was actually declaring that Jesus Christ, even though I'm dying on this cross, even though I'm suffering, and I'm humiliated, even though I'm naked, I am victorious. I control all things. Okay? I'm defeating death, I'm defeating Satan while I'm suffering. I am the suffering servant, the suffering Messiah that comes to save you. That's this declaration here. Jesus Christ of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And on the physical death of Jesus Christ, okay? By the way, this information I got from the Journal of the American Medical Association. Have you guys heard of the Journal of the American? Some of you guys are not in medicine, okay, maybe some of you have been, but one of the most reputable journals in medicine is the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, okay? Several decades ago, they actually got a team of doctors to look into the death of Jesus Christ, the crucifixion, and they found out this. Clearly, the weight of historical and medical evidence indicates that Jesus was dead before the wound to his side was inflicted, and supports the traditional view that the spear thrust between his right ribs probably perforated not only his right lung, but also his pericardium and heart, and thereby ensured his death. Okay? The Journal of the American Medical Association, not your average Christian magazine. Okay? Not your. Okay? This is from the Journal of Medicine, right? They say they did research on this, and they clearly know how Jesus died. Okay? And they say that clearly he had died, according to the research that they have looked into. Alright, so here's a comic that kind of makes fun of the swoon theory, to show how comical the swoon theory is. Okay? Maybe Jesus didn't die. Maybe he just passed out on the cross, then woke up in the tomb, pushed over the 2-ton stone, overpowered the Roman soldiers, and then escaped. Do you see how ridiculous this is? Can you imagine even starting a huge worldwide movement in that weakened state? Imagine, let's pretend you did swoon. Let's pretend Jesus did swoon and you woke up. Okay? Can you imagine the condition he was in? He had nails and he had all his laceration on the back. He was weakened. He was in a horrible state. Can you imagine? He'd go to the disciples and go, okay, preach the gospel to the nations. Okay? The disciples would have said, hey, Jesus, we need to take you to the hospital. We don't want preaching. Let's take you to the hospital right now. Okay, that's how ridiculous these people are. But they're grasping at straws. The reason is this, okay? Remember what the Bible says, okay? The unbelievers, they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And God makes fools of them. If you listen to the arguments, it's so foolish. Unfortunately, these people are dominating our universities, and a lot of them are actually propagating this. I heard a lot of this, what the skeptics said, in the universities. In fact, my faith was shaken. For about 3-4 months, I was an atheist because of what the professors told me. But later on, when I did research, I found out it was all a lie. It was all a hoax. It was all based on theories and stupid theories. The strongest evidence that we have, however, is this. The willingness of Jesus' disciples, Paul and James, die for their belief in Jesus' resurrection. This is the strongest evidence I believe we have. Okay? A bit of human psyche. A sane man may die for a belief that he believes to be true. Okay? If that belief is not true, then this man has been fooled to give up his life. Okay? However, no sane man will die for a belief that he knows to be false. Does that make sense? Okay. The disciples would have to be crazy to die for a lie, and they died grisly, torturous deaths for a lie. If that were the case, that's impossible. Okay. Now you can have like a Muslim terrorist go into a plane and would be willing to die, crash into a building. Okay. But they don't know 100% for sure. They haven't seen Muhammad in heaven or what have you. Okay, they're just going by what they believe. But the disciples of Jesus Christ, the apostles, they died knowing, seeing as eyewitnesses. Okay, that's the difference. Jesus' disciples knew the truth about Jesus' resurrection and were willing to give up their life for this belief. Okay, let's take a look at some timelines here. Okay, Jesus died approximately 30 AD, around 30 AD.